This is a story about 117 men, women, and children who sailed to the edge of the known world and then vanished without a trace, leaving behind a single word that nobody has been able to explain for over 400 years. To understand what happened at Roanoke, you have to understand what England was trying to do in 1587 and why it was so desperate to do it. Spain had been in the Americas for nearly a century. Spanish gold from the New World was funding Spanish armies across Europe, financing wars, building empires, and making Philip II the most powerful monarch on earth. From across the water, England saw all of this happen and knew they were in trouble. It wasn't just that a neighbor was doing well. It was the sinking feeling that their own lead was disappearing right in front of their eyes. Sir Walter Raleigh, a courtier with Queen Elizabeth's favor and a talent for ambition, had been granted a charter to establish an English colony in North America. The purpose was not idealistic, but strategic. A permanent English presence on the American coast would give England a base from which to raid Spanish treasure fleets, claim land before Spain took it all, and let everyone know that England was not just watching during the age of exploration. The first attempt at Roanoke in 1585 had been a military expedition. Soldiers and sailors, no families, and no plan for permanence. The colony didn't even make it to its first anniversary. It was a total train wreck, mostly because they couldn't figure out how to feed themselves, and worse, they couldn't stop picking fights with the neighbors. The guy in charge, Ralph Lane, was incredibly paranoid. He actually tracked down and killed a local chief because of a rumor he heard. It was a massive unforced error that basically guaranteed they'd never get help from the locals. By the time Francis Drake's fleet appeared on the horizon in 1586, the colonists didn't care about empire building anymore. They dropped everything and scrambled onto those ships like their lives depended on it. Raleigh regrouped. The second attempt would be different. This time there would be families, women, and children. People with a stake in making the settlement permanent because they had no other home to return to. The destination this time would be the Chesapeake Bay, further north, away from the tribes the first colony had damaged relations with, in territory better suited to agriculture. At the head of this venture, Raleigh placed John White, an artist, a man who had been to Roanoke on the 1585 expedition, who had painted detailed watercolors of the native people and the local wildlife, and who understood the region better than almost anyone in England. In April 1587, White led 117 men, women, and children out of Plymouth. 2 of the women were pregnant for the 10-week crossing. They were largely middle-class Londoners, tradespeople, craftsmen, families looking for land and opportunity in a place that didn't yet have enough history to close those doors. Among them were White's own daughter Eleanor and her husband Ananias Dare. Eleanor was heavily pregnant. They never reached the Chesapeake. The fleet's master pilot was a man named Simon Fernandes, and Simon Fernandes had his own agenda. He was a Portuguese navigator on the English payroll, one of those guys who always seemed to be playing both sides. Nobody really knew what his actual angle was, and he definitely wasn't in the habit of explaining himself to anyone. When the fleet reached Roanoke Island in late July, Fernandes announced that the sailing season was too advanced to continue north to the Chesapeake. The colonists would be put ashore at Roanoke, the same island the first colony had failed on, the same island surrounded by the same tribes who remembered the English and what the English had done. White protested, but Fernandes was unmoved. The colonists were put ashore with their supplies, and Fernandes sailed away. They were stranded on the wrong island. They did what they could. They even repaired the fort left by the 1585 garrison. They explored the area, attempted to rebuild diplomatic relations with the CROATOAN tribe to the south, one of the few friendly groups remaining, and began the work of constructing a settlement that could survive the winter. 3 days before Eleanor gave birth, a colonist named George Howe was found dead in a creek, killed by native arrows while crabbing alone. The colony had been on the island for less than 2 weeks. 3 days after Howe's death, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a girl. They named her Virginia Dare, the first child born of English parents in the Americas. John White held his granddaughter. He had no way of knowing it would be the last time he saw her. 1 month after landing, with winter approaching and supplies running thin, and the relationship with the surrounding tribes deteriorating by the week, the colonists made a decision. They asked White to go back to England for supplies, but he did not want to go. He had just become a grandfather. He was the governor of a settlement that needed him. He argued against leaving. The colonists insisted. He was the man with the connections, the man whose name carried weight with Raleigh, the man most likely to secure what they needed in time. White gave in. He noted later in writing that he feared what people back in England might say, that he had abandoned his post for personal gain, taken the first available ship home. He went anyway. He promised to return within months. He would not be back for 3 years. The Spanish Armada arrived in 1588 and changed everything. Philip II had assembled the largest naval force in European history, 130 warships, an invasion fleet intended to land 26,000 soldiers on English soil and end the Elizabethan era by force. England responded by commandeering every available ship, every available man, every resource that could be turned toward defense. White tried repeatedly to secure ships for the resupply mission, but was denied every time. The war with Spain consumed 2 years of his life and 2 years of the colony's survival window. He secured passage in 1590 on a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at Roanoke. The terms were not ideal. The ship's captains were primarily interested in raiding Spanish vessels and were not going to let a resupply mission interfere with that priority. White took what he could get. The fleet anchored off Roanoke Island on the evening of August 17, 1590. They could see a light on the shore and heard someone singing in the darkness, or thought they did. They fired guns and trumpets. No answer came back through the dark. The next morning, White and a party of men rowed ashore and found the settlement abandoned. He walked through it carefully, noting everything. The buildings had not been burned or destroyed. They had been systematically dismantled and removed. The timber, the fixtures, everything portable was gone. The area around the former settlement had been enclosed in a sturdy palisade that had not been there when White left, suggesting the colonists had spent time fortifying the site before departing. The cannons and heavy equipment that should have been at the nearby bay were gone. There were no human remains, no bones, no graves, no bodies. Whatever had happened here had happened to living people, and those living people had had time to pack. The absence of a Maltese cross was the detail White seized on immediately. Before he had left 3 years earlier, they had agreed. Carve your destination if you move, and if you move under duress, if you are fleeing something, if you have no choice, carve a cross above it. No cross meant no emergency. No cross meant they had chosen to leave. He found the letters CRO carved into a tree at the perimeter. He found the word CROATOAN carved into one of the palisade posts. He stood there with 3 years of Atlantic crossings and Spanish armadas and bureaucratic obstruction behind him, and he read his granddaughter's forwarding address. CROATOAN Island was 50 miles to the south. It was the home of the CROATOAN people, one of the friendliest native groups in the region. Manteo, the colony's most trusted native intermediary, was from CROATOAN. White had every reason to believe that was where his people were. He ordered the ships south immediately. A storm came, and it was the kind of storm that the North Carolina Outer Banks produce with the casual cruelty of a coastline that has wrecked ships for centuries. The anchor cables on one of the ships snapped in the rough seas, leaving the vessel dangerously exposed. The captain made the decision that captains in those circumstances make. The ships and their crews came first. They would winter in the Caribbean and return to Croatoan in the spring. They did not return in the spring. The privateering captains had other priorities. White found himself back in England with no way back to the Americas, no money, no ships, and no further ability to help the people he had left behind. He spent his final years in Ireland, writing accounts of the voyages, meticulous, detailed records of what had happened, ending with the discovery of Croatoan and everything after. He died around 1593. No record of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was ever found. The question of what happened to the 117 colonists of Roanoke has generated more theories, more speculation, and more dedicated archaeological investigation than almost any other mystery in American history. 4 centuries of historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and amateur investigators have approached it from every possible angle. The honest answer, in 2025, remains the same as it was in 1590. Nobody knows for certain. But the evidence has quietly been accumulating, and the most likely answer is not the one that the mysteries mythology tends to favor. The CROATOAN theory, that the colonists walked south, arrived at CROATOAN Island, and integrated into the CROATOAN community, is supported by more physical evidence than any other explanation. When the English explorer John Lawson visited the region in 1701, more than a century after the colony's disappearance, he encountered the Hatteras people on what was by then called Hatteras Island, the former CROATOAN Island. They told him that several of their ancestors had been white. Some of them had gray eyes, which they offered as confirmation. They spoke of an ancestral connection to people who had come across the ocean long ago. Lawson recorded all of this and theorized that the lost colonists had assimilated into the CROATOAN community after losing hope of rescue from England. The archaeology backs him up. Excavations on Hatteras Island have produced objects that have no business being there if English colonists had not brought them. We're talking about actual physical evidence, scraps of German pottery, a rapier handle, and one of those specific Nuremberg coins that matches the Roanoke site perfectly. But the real smoking gun is the hammer scale. There's so much of this blacksmithing scrap that it's pretty clear a forge was running full tilt right there back in the 1500s. The CROATOAN people had no tradition of blacksmithing. The English did. The present-day Roanoke Hatteras tribe identifies itself formally as descending from both the Croatan and the 1587 colonists. There are people alive today who may share DNA with the families that stood on that island and carved a word into a post and walked south to find a better chance. But not all of them may have gone to CROATOAN. A second body of evidence suggests that a portion of the colonists moved northwest toward the Chesapeake Bay, their original intended destination, and lived among native communities there for nearly 20 years before being destroyed. Spanish records from the period reference an English-speaking community somewhere in the Virginia interior. English accounts from the Jamestown colony, established in 1607, contain statements attributed to the Powhatan chief Wahansanaka, claiming that he had destroyed a community of people, some of them clearly of European origin, at approximately the same time Jamestown was being built. If those accounts are accurate, some of the Roanoke colonists survived for 2 decades before a different kind of violence ended them. Then in 2012, a discovery changed the investigative landscape entirely. A map drawn by John White himself, held in a London archive for over 400 years, was found to contain a patch of paper concealing something beneath it. Under the patch, visible only through special imaging technology, was a symbol, the mark of a fort drawn at a location on the North Carolina mainland that matched neither Roanoke nor CROATOAN. The First Colony Foundation began excavating that location in Bertie County, North Carolina. They found 16th century European ceramics in the soil. The dig is ongoing. The ceramics have not yet been definitively linked to the lost colonists, but they are there, in the ground, waiting. The darkest theory requires the least evidence because it requires only the land itself. An island with poor agricultural potential, a winter without adequate supplies, a native population with every reason to withhold food, and no resupply for 3 years. Some historians argue that the carved word was hope rather than fact. The colonists intended to go to CROATOAN, began the journey, and did not make it. Starvation, exposure, conflict. The land just swallowed them whole. That's what happens when you show up totally unprepared. The environment doesn't care about your plans. It just eats you. After 400 years, this isn't just a cold case anymore. It's become a full-blown American myth. People keep coming back to it because it hits a nerve. It's that uncomfortable spot where the history books just stop, the records go dark, and you're left staring at a total blank. Virginia Dare became a figure of American folklore, her story told and retold in novels and poems and plays. Her life after the age of 3 days entirely imaginary because nobody knows what it was. CROATOAN became shorthand for disappearance itself. Writers and filmmakers have used the word for over a century as a symbol of things that vanish without explanation, of the irreducible unknown. But the people of Roanoke were not mythological figures. They were a pregnant woman on a 10-week Atlantic crossing, a man building a fort on an island he had not chosen, a governor who did not want to leave and had no way of knowing that when he stepped onto a ship, he was stepping out of his family's story forever, a 3-day-old girl whose only historical footprint is the record of her birth and the fact that she was named after a place and never heard from again. What happened to them is probably not a mystery in the way the mythology suggests. The evidence points, quietly and consistently, toward what people in impossible situations have always done. They adapted, they moved, they found the nearest community willing to absorb them, and they disappeared into it. They became someone else's ancestors. Their tools ended up in other people's houses, and their blood ended up in other people's veins. That is not a satisfying ending. It does not have the drama of massacre or the neatness of a single explanation. But it is what survival looked like on the edge of a continent in 1587, 3 years after the governor left and the ship stopped coming and the winter came anyway. They left a one-word message, packed up what they could carry, and headed straight into the brush. And that's where the story ends. The forest just took them in and kept its mouth shut. If you enjoy bizarre, true stories like this, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you on the next one.